Hello.
Hi, Gail.
Are you Philip?
I am indeed. How are you?
Hello, my dear. How are you?
I'm very good. Nice to see you.
Well, I was very surprised. And looking at those films, I hadn't looked at them in probably 40 or 50 years. It
Ah,
sounds
yes.
awful to say, but I
Yeah.
hadn't, and I was amazed at how racist it was. I mean, it's so politically incorrect right now. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. I haven't seen the Adam West Batman TV series that often, and certainly not recently. A few episodes. I think this is one of the more risque sort of two-parters that there was. Um, we'll get into it, but I think that it's I think it's quite respectful in terms of the Native Americans, and it's sort of there is a sense that they were exploited. So it's not really making fun of them, but of course it is set in the backdrop of the 60s and certain words and and
The understatement is
attitudes and
there.
things. That's what I'm looking for. Yes, so it is a point of its time, but I don't necessarily a very negative one. But it will depend, I think, on people's opinions, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's not negative. I mean, I don't want to put it that way. It's just politically incorrect. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
the fact that they had an Italian playing an
mm,
Indian now is so not proper. And
yeah,
second of all, I mean, everything about it was, and that's part of the reason why most people don't know I did Batman,
right, yeah,
because I founded an organization called the American Indian College Fund. And
oh,
we
yes,
raise
yes,
scholarship and endowment for Indian kids to go to school on their reservations.
mm,
And I've educated over 100,000 kids.
yeah.
And if anybody saw that, they would have a heart attack.
I think it's
But
you
it
know
was fun.
yeah. I mean, it is done tongue in cheek, and it's not meant to be taken too seriously. And I suppose in some respects it highlights the issues of the land being taken away, and there's certain an educational element to it, and maybe kids might have picked up on, and the Indians not being the Native Americans not being treated fairly. So it's but yes, you wouldn't make it today, would you? So
No, that's for
absolutely
sure.
not. No. But again, I think that's part of the appeal of these shows, isn't it? It's sort of a
Well,
time
now
capsule.
it's funny because what it did was it made me an activist, actually.
Oh,
um,
right.
because of having seen it and then recognizing, because it wasn't at that point in my career, I was not actively involved in Native issues yet.
Hmm.
And so it didn't enter my mind. It was a part, and I just did it because it was recommended. I was Dozer, who was the producer of it, had
Yeah.
seen me at Columbia and said, come over and we would like to do you with Vincent Price.
Right.
And so when I went over with him and did it, I looked at the script and I went, oh, that's interesting. And then
Yeah.
afterwards, after we shot it and I looked at it, I went, oh my God, this
Yeah.
is unbelievable. I
Hmm.
mean, mainly because of, and they tried to make it as much PC as possible without, we didn't even use those words in those days.
No. No.
And nobody even thought about it. I mean, it never entered anybody's mind.
Hmm.
And nowadays, I'm sure there would be all kinds of uprisings if something happened like that.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, you could perhaps obviously cover these kind of issues, but you would do it in a completely different way. Yeah, perfect. So what I would do is I have the episodes on my TV, which is just in front of me. So I will play it and sort of use it as a springboard for our conversation. So anybody watching along on YouTube, if they want to sort of just get their copies of the episodes in front of them, and I'll do a countdown from 5, and then we'll press play, and we'll talk as the episodes sort of are in the background. Because of copyright, I can't show the episodes on our screen or anything. So just use it as a springboard for
Right.
our conversation. It's an interesting point that you made earlier, that this kind of got you made you aware of Native American issues. and maybe it got a lot of other people interested as well. So these kind of things, although perhaps not PC, perhaps started people thinking, perhaps, shows and things of this nature, maybe.
Well, I hope so. I have a lot of heritage in my background.
Hmm.
I don't claim blood because blood quantum is a big deal in Indian country.
Yeah.
But I have heritage, and I know that Native people have been so misaligned and so misunderstood, and particularly in America,
Hmm.
but everywhere, because most people, but there are indigenous people all over the planet. And now indigenous is becoming a buzzword that people are talking about,
Hmm.
which has taken all of these years because nobody paid any attention up until then.
Hmm.
And I don't want to get on my Native American bandwagon because I can go on for hours because the people have been so abused and I mean, people talk about African Americans in America and how hard it was for them.
Hmm.
It's probably 1,000 times harder for Native people because easily because they lost their land. And when I was starting work involved with the college fund, I used to start out all of my conversations with when Native Americans lost the war for their land. And that's basically what happened is they lost. And my husband was English. I don't know if you knew that. But
yes.
and he was a television director. He did commercials. And I used to come home after all these meetings on the reservations and say, how can people get it so wrong? And he said, don't you understand? It's the conquerors that write the history books, not the people that lost.
Yes.
And so I'm very proud of the fact that because of my involvement in helping with the college fund, that we've educated, and now we've got a lot of Native American writers writing from another perspective about Native issues. And we now have congressmen and senators and people that are Native people. So it's made a difference. So it's been probably my life's work in a way, and it's been well worth it. And when I looked at this thing again the other night, because I wanted to make sure I had looked at it before I talked to you, I went, oh my God, no wonder I've never told anybody about this.
Yeah.
Because it is at that time, people just didn't have any consciousness about Native issues at all.
No, that's very true.
Mm.
If people want to find out a bit more of your work and support it, if they just go to your website, there's information on there, I believe.
Well, I have a few websites. I'm also an artist. So I have a website that's called Gail Hire Bruce. And my husband's name was Murray. And back in the day when I got married over 50 years ago, women didn't just keep their name. So I started throwing Hire into my name as I got older because I went, wait a minute, I had a whole life before I met him. And nobody knows about it, mainly because I didn't use my name. And nowadays, women are keeping their names all the time. But in those days, nobody did. I mean, you just automatically took your husband's name. So, I mean, we've come such a long way, Philip. I mean, think about it. You're a young man. And in the amount of time I've walked on this planet, it has changed so dramatically. It's very exciting. And the Batman series is a great example of it because it is definitely timed, but it's beyond time in a way because of the cartoon aspect of it. And it takes away a little of the illness of the racism that you see there, but it's not negative racism. It's not about anger and hate and that kind of stuff. It's about ignorance and how people were treated,
Yeah, and it's deep-rooted things in the culture of sayings and attitudes. Again, not meant as racist, but it's seeped into the language, hasn't it, and the interactions and things.
Oh, very much so. And not being an American, you probably wouldn't appreciate it as much because you have your own issues where racism comes in where you guys are living, and it's all over the planet. And it's like I have a hard time right now with body shaming and everybody going, oh, you got to embrace the people that are overweight and all of that. Well, I do, but there's also a part of me that looks at it and goes, they're killing themselves.
Well,
They,
that's it.
they're overweight, and we're trying to celebrate being overweight when they're probably going to die 20 years earlier than they need to.
Mhm. It-
And so there's all of the positive and negatives of that kind of stuff that goes on.
Mm.
So I was very excited. I'm kind of thrilled that you reached out to me
Oh,
because
good, good.
it made me realize where I've come
Mm.
and how far I've come in the aspect of what I do and how important it is to me
Yeah.
that people be recognized. I mean, it's like, what is your heritage?
Just very boring English through and through, really. So no Welsh, no Scottish, no Irish. Just seems to be sort of both my mum and dad have lived in. They come from the same area, the same county, or as you would say, state. So it's not exotic at all, unfortunately. But, yeah.
Well, but it is very much European
Hmm.
and very much that. Now in Indian country, because it was such a small community, and when the tribes intermixed, so I don't know if you know this, and I'm giving you information that has nothing to do with Batman, but it does this episode. And so when they talk about he's the last of the Mohicans or whatever they said he was, and he was so wonderful, the guy that played Chicken Little.
He
I
does,
just
yeah.
loved him.
Yeah.
And he was so fascinated when he found out I had heritage that he kept saying, well, tell me about what you knew. And I knew nothing because my father, whose side of the family it was on, was very embarrassed. I mean, he was born at the turn of the century, in the early 1900s. And he didn't want people to know he was Native. I mean, because there was so much discrimination against Native people and so many misconceptions about Native people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, on so many levels, so it's very interesting how that has all changed now. And you would never know that because you live in England. You are English, you're through and through English, and you look through and through English.
Oh, thank
Which
you.
is a compliment, by the way.
Thank you very much.
But my husband, he was English, but he was also Scottish and very much Scottish. And so he was a melting pot, where Native people had to be a melting pot because their communities were so small that they instinctually realized that if they intermarried, you'd end up with a village idiot, because you can't, I mean, in England is a large country, so you can English can marry English, but in the tribes, there might only be 1,000, 2,000 people in a tribe. And if they intermarried, it would not be great. If you find somebody who says, I'm a full-blooded Sioux, you kind of look at them a little askew and go, really?
Yes,
so it's a whole other culture.
Good point, yes.
So it was interesting. I had forgotten how much of it was involved with, Gotham and being taken over.
Yeah. Well, sure, we'll come on to lots of interesting things in a second. So I paused on the Batman logo, which says Batman in color. So I'm just going to count from 5 to 1, and anybody who wishes to watch the episode along can do so. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and play. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, Gail, is how did you get cast in Batman? How did it come into your world?
Well, I had never thought about acting. And fortunately, I discovered at an early age that I was a terrible actress. But the thing that was so wonderful about it is I had a very dear friend, a guy by the name of Bruce Kessler. And his parents owned a company called Rosemary Reed Bathing Suits. And Howard Hawks, who was a big director in those days, we had been looking for somebody to be in this film called Red Line 7000. And it was about racing. And Bruce, a friend of mine whose parents owned Rosemary Reed Bathing Suits, had become a pal. And we used to go to races all the time together. So he knew I knew about cars. And I wrote Car Corner when I was in school, and that for the local school paper. And because I always loved cars. So Bruce and I became good friends, and we had mutual friends, and there was a whole group of us that would go to races. And Hawks was looking for somebody to star in this film. And he was driving down Sunset Boulevard, and they'd casted everybody that they could find. And Howard Hawks had discovered, and you may not know any of these names, but Lauren Bacall and Jane Russell and a whole bunch of people. And he was well into his 70s at that point, and he wanted to have one last discovery. So he was kind of looking for somebody that nobody knew that he thought might be interesting. So he had been casting like crazy, and he and Bruce were driving down after looking for scouting locations for the racing part of the film. They were driving down Sunset Boulevard, and there was a picture of me up on a billboard because I had been modeling for Rosemary Reed, and they used this picture for the billboard, right? And Hawks pointed at it and said to Bruce, I want to find somebody like that woman. Why can't we get her in for a screen test? And Bruce said, well, actually, I know her, and I could if you want her. He said, okay. So he brought me in and gave me a screen test, flew me in from New York. I did the screen test, and by God, I got the part. Now, I had never thought about acting. It didn't enter my radar screen. I grew up in Hollywood. It was not on my agenda at all. But he put me in this film. And I didn't know my ass from my elbow about how to act. I didn't know how to hit my light. I didn't know anything about acting. And the co-star of that particular film was a guy by the name of Jimmy Caan, who went on to do The Godfather and a whole bunch of films. And Jimmy very sweetly would take me behind the set and run lines with me and try and help me, because he clearly saw I did not know what I was doing. And so he literally helped me get through this movie. And then I was signed to do a movie with Robert Redford, Robert Mitchum and John Wayne, called El Dorado. And I was under contract. That's back in the day when there were contract players and all that. And I was under contract through Hawks with Columbia, with Paramount. And I was supposed to go into El Dorado. But Hawks found out that Jimmy had been giving me acting lessons, and he got very upset. And so he put me on suspension and wouldn't let me work with anybody else. So I went over to Columbia Pictures. My agents took me over to Columbia, and I went into their contract program there. And it was wonderful because I got to work with Katharine Hepburn and all of these fabulous people. And one of the guest directors is this guy, Dozer, who was producing Batman. And he saw me and said, we're doing Vincent Price as Egghead, and we'd like you to come in and audition for Miss Bacon. And I went, sure, why not? So I went in and auditioned and read for the part. Had no idea what the script said at that point. They just gave me a sheet to read against him, and which I did. And then when I saw what the film was about, I went, okay, this could be interesting, you know. And it was, and there were some wonderful moments in it. But that's how I got Batman, is that from a billboard on Sunset Boulevard that I probably never would have gotten. And it turned out I had a wonderful couple of years, and I enjoyed it immensely. And I studied acting. Hawks did not want me to study because he thought I was a raw talent. But I thought, if I'm going to do this, I better learn if I have any talent or not. And so I started studying at Columbia. I took acting classes. I did all of this stuff once my agents broke me out of the contract with Hawks. And I discovered I could hit my marks, and I was a qualified actress, right? But I didn't have the passion. And if you want to be successful, you've got to want to do it more than life. I mean, you have to almost be ready to give your firstborn child up to be able to do it. And I realized I didn't have that kind of passion. And Laddie and Sandy, my two agents, had gotten me a movie with Paul Newman called Harper. And one of the women I was under contract with at Columbia at that point had gone up for the part also. And I had gotten it. And I knew she wanted it more than life. I mean, she would have done anything to get that part. And I didn't care one way or another. And that's when I went to Laddie and Sandy, my agents, and I said, you know, I think I'm in the wrong business. Because I don't have the passion. I want to be in something that makes me absolutely drool. I can't wait to get to work. I'm so excited. And I didn't feel that way about acting. And I said, because of who I am and the way I look and all of that stuff, I'm taking up space that could go to somebody else. And I think that I'm going to step aside. And they were mortified. You just got a movie with Paul Newman and you're going to quit? And I said, yeah. And a girl by the name of Paula Holt, Paula Prentice got it. Yeah. And she was the one that was under contract with me at Columbia. And I went, this is so much better, because she really wanted to do film and be an actress and do all that stuff. And so I just stepped away and stopped acting at that point. But it turned out to be the most valuable thing in the whole world, because I learned how to deliver a line. I learned how to speak in front of people without being self-conscious. I can now speak in front of 1,000 people without my knees knocking and being terrified. And I couldn't have done that if I hadn't had this opportunity that was given to me on a silver platter at that stage of my life. And I am so grateful for it, because it literally carried me through the rest of my life, and in a very positive way that I'm very proud of. And so I'm kind of proud of Batman, actually, in a bizarre way, because it was the beginning and the end of me doing acting, but it got a lot of kids educated that might not have gotten educated if I hadn't been taking another stance. And it was all because of Chicken Little and Batman, because I went, this is appalling. I can't believe it. So I'm sure that's probably not what you were looking for with this interview, but
no, I think that's absolutely perfect, because one of the nice things about doing these interviews is that it takes you on different twists and turns depending on who you're talking to. And I think you're right when you watch something like this and some of the attitudes and things, it can inspire people to think, well, actually, I'm going to want to read into this a little bit. And then you realize quite how bad it is, and then people like yourself, do something about it. So I think that's a lovely, for something that's a kid's show, to have that, to have had an effect on you to where you are now, I think just shows the power of these things, doesn't it, really?
Yeah. Well, even my grandkids didn't know I did Batman. And you blew my cover.
Oh,
basically.
Yeah.
But my daughter showed it to my 12-year-old, and she went, "Oh my God, that's Mama!" Yeah. She was amazed. So that was kind of nice. I enjoyed that, actually.
Oh, good. Yeah. Because of course, when you were casting Batman, it was the show to be on, really, wasn't it? I mean,
very much.
Had you watched it prior to your involvement?
I'd watched a couple of episodes, and but Vincent Price, I was very fond of as a human being. He was a huge art collector, one of the most sophisticated, droll, educated, well-informed human beings I ever met. And he was absolutely amazing. I was so excited to be able to work with him. And oddly enough, his daughter found me a few years ago, because she lives in Santa Fe, and because we have a lot of Indian schools in New Mexico and Arizona and that area. And and at that point, I had started to put my maiden name into things I did.
Right.
And she found me and went, "Oh my God, you worked with my dad." And the time that we worked together, I mean, I did a couple of other things with him, but for Batman, my mother came over to the set and she absolutely loved him. I mean, she thought the world rose and set, the sun rose and set on him. And he went out of his way. I mean, Vincent Price was the most elegant man I've ever met. and so articulate. And he made such a fuss over my mother that I just fell in love with this guy irrevocably forever. And if he said, Gail, come over here, I need your help, I would have been there in 37 seconds, because he was just an amazing, gracious, kind man who was very generous,
Yeah, he's one of my favorite, like lots of classic TV shows, and he always pops up as a guest star, and when he does, it's always a fantastic performance that he gives. We're looking now at Edward Everett Horton playing Chief Screaming Chicken, and we were saying that he was you have fond memories of Edward.
Oh, he was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And he could not, I mean, they cast him because of the way he looked, but he kept saying, I'm not an Indian, why am I playing an Indian? But he was so gracious and so wonderful. And I knew a little bit about Indian culture, and but not a lot at that point in my life. But I was able to share with him some information that he found interesting. But he was an incredible guy, and I love the way they dressed him out in the full headdress. I mean, with blue feathers, no less. Oh my goodness, they hardly exist. But he was just wonderful and gracious and kind, and we used to spend a whole bunch of time together just hanging out and talking. But he was a good guy.
Yeah, it seems like he enjoys the part, and again, when he meets Batman, the whole sort of different Indian greeting. Of course, it's not meant to be cruel or anything. It's sort of like a parody, and he says that Batman's the only one that knows traditional Mohican greeting. So Batman is being very respectful of culture. So there is a sort of message to the kids of being respectful. I guess.
Well, I got that, and I thought that was very good. And thank you, Philip, for bringing that up, because I think that when people meet people that are unique and unusual and it's not part of their norm, it's so respectful. It's like in Indian country, if you admire somebody's necklace, and I learned this the hard way, unfortunately, because if you admire something, Native people will take it off and give it to you. Literally on the spot. They'll just say, oh, you like it? Here, it's yours, and put it on you. And then you are obligated to give them something back, because that's part of the culture. You take from one hand, you pass it on with the other. And I lost my favorite pair of earrings because I admired somebody's necklace. And then I went, oh no, I got to give him some earrings. I got to give him something. And the only thing I had on were earrings. So I gave him back. But he loved that story. He was fascinated, especially with the pelts and all that stuff that they were supposed to give to him. And he was giving them the rights to use his property, basically.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because it's the scene we're watching now actually is Egghead negotiating the contract with the chief, and the chief says, I hope you're no Indian giver. And that's a reference to, of course, what we were kind of saying is that the Indians kind of gave things expecting a trade sort of thing. The Europeans kind of thought, oh, this is just a gift, I don't have to give anything back. And that was obviously a cultural misunderstanding that, of course, led to a whole number of issues. So there are references to how poorly the Native Americans have been treated in this episode. It does come through with perhaps the time that 50 years later, and looking through us having a bit more knowledge about it, it does come through.
Well, just to clarify that particular issue, is that in people, when they say, oh, you're an Indian giver, that means they think that means that Indians gave and then took back, right?
Yes, that's right.
And that's not the case at all. In fact, in all of the treaties that Native people made with the Europeans who conquered their land, with all the treaties, not one Indian ever broke a treaty, ever. And America continued to break treaties constantly. So Indian giver was really white people that would give to Indians and then take it back. And so it's always been a misconstrued situation where they
Yeah.
think, oh, Indians gave it and then took it back. And that wasn't actually true. It's that white people gave it and then took it back. And
That's
that
right, yeah.
meant that they were the Indian givers. They gave it to
Mm.
an Indian and took it. So a lot of people don't understand that part about Indian giving.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was something that I, of course, I heard the expression, and I sort of did a little bit of research before our chat and looked into it a bit more and had a better understanding of it as a result of this. It's amazing how much gets sort of twisted in history, and there's a lot of it, I think, is ignorance, isn't it? People sort of not understanding, what actually happened.
Well, there's some atrocities that happened. It's like scalping. I
Yeah.
mean, Native people got handled with, everybody thought Native people scalped.
Mm.
And they didn't, it was the French. And when
Yeah.
the Hudson Bay trading companies were there and they came down, they were, beaver hats were very popular. That's why it was beaver skins.
Yes.
Because, and it's interesting that they understood that because they literally got it from, I think they used beaver skins, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Was it? What was it?
I think it is.
I can't remember.
Oh, it will come to me in a second, but I was just going to point out the scene we're looking at now, which is the laughing gas scene. Egghead throws an egg and of course got laughing gas. And there's a nice little moment when you all exit and you blow Batman and Robin a kiss. I thought that was a nice little touch on your part. Were you able to throw in little things like that, or was it in the script or direction? How much could you bring to yourself to it?
Well, in that particular instance, it was to show that she didn't have any affinity. I mean, she wasn't locked down to Egghead. Is that she also recognized that Batman had some interesting characteristics.
Yes, yeah.
So they wanted me to show that I was a bit of a flirt and all of that stuff. So that's what we came up with.
So things like your costume and the way you had your hair, would you have an input in that, or would it be kind of sort of all designed?
Well, it was a little bit of an input, but because they wanted it to have to do with Egghead. And so the hat, that yellow hat I wore was, I said, if Egghead's got a head, should I have something that is like that?
Yeah.
And they wanted to have something. They were thinking about a beret that was like a fried egg or something on that level. And then we saw this hat and we thought, oh, that could work. And so the costume department worked with me. And really we came up with it together, but they did a wonderful job. And I love the pinstripe suit and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, I even got it. They gave it to me. I liked it so much.
You didn't
I
keep
think
it.
I even have it in a drawer somewhere.
That might be worth something. I'd hold on to that. Yeah. Because Batman has become, this series has become so beloved by multiple generations, and I think anything connected to, so I wouldn't like to guess how much that's worth, but little things like scripts and things that people wouldn't have really kept, sometimes if people keep those, it's the sentimental value alone, I think, for these shows is quite extreme.
Well, it's amazing that it has gone on like that, but I can understand that to a certain degree now that I'm looking at it with hindsight. I mean, isn't that the expression, is we have 20/20 vision with hindsight?
We do indeed, yes. Yes. I was just wondering what you thought of the sets. Fantastic comic book brought to life. Did you get a chance to go in the Batcave or other things that you weren't?
Oh yeah, because they had a big sound stage and everything was all on one sound stage, so you could wander around and look at it. But I think I'm probably one of the only people that's still alive did that at this point. But yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, we wandered around. Yeah. I mean, you couldn't help it because it was part of the whole set, because they would have here, and then they would, the Batcave stayed forever. Yeah. The Manor House stayed forever, and it was a place on Sunset Boulevard that everybody knows. And anybody that's lived in LA goes, oh, I know that house on Doheny, right? So
yeah.
but So yeah, we wandered around and all of that stuff.
Hmm.
So, and then the other main part of the script, the stages would be broken down according to what episodes they were doing or who the guest star was or whatever. But all the standard stuff stayed there.
Because they were quite expensive sets, the Wayne Manor and the police headquarters, the Batcave.
Yeah.
And when the show was on its last legs, at the end of the third series, there was a debate on whether or not another network would pick it up, and one did want to, but the sets had already been destroyed by that point. They didn't want to spend $100,000 or whatever it was redoing them. So unfortunately, that kind of sort of stopped the
Oh,
series.
is that the reason? I didn't
Yeah.
know. Well, see,
Yeah.
I learned something new. That's very interesting.
I just wanted to talk about some of the other people that you were in with the episode with. There's a couple of lovely henchmen that part of Egghead's gang, Benedict and Fu Young. Do you remember the henchmen at all?
Oh, sure.
Um,
Actually, they worked a lot with Howard Hawks, and one of them was going to be in El Dorado.
Oh, right.
And so I had met them at Paramount. I've forgotten where this was shot. It wasn't, I think it was the 20th century.
20th Century Fox, I got it down as, yeah.
And so I had met them a couple of times with Howard Hawks before. And they were lovely, especially the taller guy. I've forgotten his name right now, but
the two people I have, one is Gene Dynisky, and then it's Ben Weldon. Gene Dynisky is Benedict in the episode. They do look quite distinctive because they both sort of are balding gentlemen, but I think Benedict, yes, he's a taller one.
He's the tall one, I think. Yeah. And I had met him with Howard Hawks because he was going to be one of the bad guys in El Dorado at one point.
We'll talk about the egg throwing fight scene later, but there's the scene earlier on with you're with Chief Screaming Chicken, and you are sort of watching a fight with Batman and the villains, but you don't seem to. I take it you probably weren't. You may have done your reaction separately to the fight. I assume you weren't always there when because it would have taken quite a time to do the action scenes.
Well, they kept it because they had to shoot a whole episode in a short period of time, so you were pretty much on the set. And so that you could see the interaction and all of that stuff. So I saw almost all of the shooting.
Yes. I just wondered whether you have any recollection of the stunt doubles for either Egghead, Batman, or Robin, because I believe how they did the action scenes is they would get the stunt doubles to do it all with the stunt. So all the main actors would be the stunt doubles for them, and then they would get the actors in, and they would do a run, and they would kind of sort of edit together what was the best of the two, sort of thing. So would you have sort of talked to the stunt people?
Actually, it's funny you brought that up, because when I saw it again after all these years, I looked at it and I saw how Batman jumped up and grabbed the pole and kind of shimmied along the pole. And there was no way in hell that guy would have gotten up there.
Yes, there's a
because he wasn't in the best of physical shape that he could have been in.
You just see him jump up, but you don't see him actually go across, do you? No.
Exactly. And I was very impressed on how well they shot it, because you don't see his face because of the way they structured it. The guy's forearm covers it. But the stunt people were wonderful. And also at that point, with a show, when you're the star of a show, they don't want to have any chance in hell that you're going to fall off that railing, because it can slow down production and cause a great deal of funding. So that's why they had stunt people all the time, as you well know.
Oh yeah, I mean, yes, you say one sort of twisted ankle or broken nose, and you've got to shut down the production. And particularly with Batman, we had quite a famous person coming in every week to change the schedule. I think it would have been quite a nightmare. I think obviously with the fact that we're now watching it all in big TVs and high definition, you can see the stunt people more than you would have done at the time.
Right.
The gentleman that's doubling Robin is a lot physically bigger because, of course, Burt Ward was, it would have been difficult
He
to find
was
somebody that
tiny.
was as as small as he was. That was a guy called Victor Paul, and it was Herbie Kearns who doubled for Batman, and they were the stunt principals for the whole run of the show. So they were there throughout. I must mention the very good cliffhanger, because I don't know if you're aware, but this two-parter is considered to be one of the best that they ever did. It is.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's certainly always been one of my favorites. As because I first started watching Batman, as probably a lot of people did, on reruns when I was going to primary school, and so I was about sort of 8 or 9 years old, and I would get home and watch Batman, have my tea, that sort of stuff. So that's how I sort of, and one of the stories was this one here. I mean, would you have watched the episodes as they went out? Did that interest you?
Well, I wasn't much in watching television. I was a book reader and and that kind of stuff. But I did watch the episodes because I was fascinated by who was going to be doing them and what was on and all of that stuff. So, but not religiously. I mean, 'cause I had a very active social life in those days.
Yeah.
And so I was running around a lot. I wasn't staying home watching television.
Yeah.
But it was very popular, and and I know how popular it was. And when I went on it, there was a whole big flurry about it going on in the community that I was involved in, and people were excited about it. I mean, people love Batman. It's amazing. And I look at those costumes and all of that stuff. I mean, nobody had any of the stretchy fabrics or any of that stuff in those days. And you look at the costumes and you go, it's so baggy.
Yeah.
Nowadays we have spandex and everything.
And I mean, what was nice about TV at this time is that it was a cliffhanger. So sometimes you had to come back in a week, and in this case, it was tuning tomorrow. So it was only 24 hours but that's something I think we don't really have too much with streaming. We watch a series in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Whereas I think there was a bit more of an event with something like Batman, where you had a cliffhanger and you had to come back, and people would talk about it and be excited and think of how he's going to get out of the situation.
Well, I kind of miss that about television. I mean, and film and all of that, because it was thrilling, because you did have to wait. Nowadays you don't. I mean, that much. You can wait until the series is completely over and then go in and see the whole thing.
Yeah.
But there's a part of me that likes that, because I use it as a work incentive. If I'm watching a serial thing, I'll say, okay, if I finish this presentation tonight and get it done, I can watch an episode.
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of stimulation for me. But it was thrilling, because you would block out Wednesday night or whatever night it was on, because you knew you wanted to see the next episode, because you never see it again. It would be gone. And they didn't have reruns in those days like we do now. So once the show was over, it would be over until the whole series was over. And then you might sell it to a lesser network as a rerun, as opposed to rerunning it or streaming it or anything like that. I mean, where we've come is really quite remarkable, actually. I mean, I'm kind of thrilled that I lived during this time period, and I lived past 2000, because everything in the whole world changed when 2000 happened. And as you probably know, because you're young enough and maybe just old enough, because everybody, all of the hieroglyphics, all of the cave dwellings, everything said the world was coming to an end in 2000. And technically it did, because everything as I know it, you're too young, but as I know it, changed drastically in 2000. I mean, the way we communicate, the way we eat, the way we buy food, the way every single thing in our life is different. And I think what they saw when they said the world was coming to an end was not that the world was ending, but that a time period in the span of life was ending. And we moved into the digital age. And now it is totally different. The way you buy your food, the way you entertain yourself, the way you drive your car, everything is totally different now. And I think that's what all the soothsayers and all the hieroglyphics were saying, that when it came to an end, because we thought it was Y2K, and that the world was going to crash and all of the accounts would go down. And it didn't. But since 2000, everything is different. The fact that you and I are communicating right now on a Zoom call and halfway across the world is phenomenal. That couldn't have happened before 2000.
No.
It just didn't even exist. It didn't even happen until the pandemic, really, on a level. But everything changed in our life. And I think it's very exciting. I think it's thrilling. I am so grateful that I was born in 1941, and it was at the end of the war, and or the beginning of the war, actually, for America. And everything since that time period has become totally and completely different. And it's been such a privilege to be able to see this transition in history in a bizarre way, because so many things that we did before you couldn't accomplish now, and so many things that you accomplish now are better because of what is in existence now. I mean, we couldn't communicate like we do. It's phenomenal.
And it's very interesting. I think where we almost feel like with some of the things you hear on the news of AI, and you think, well, are we on the cusp of a similar change? You know, a new era of.
We're already there.
Yes.
We're already there.
Yeah.
I mean, when I pick up the phone now, I say hello. I say hello. I say hello one more time, and then I say goodbye, because I know it's going to be an AI. Phone call.
There's lots of automated stuff, isn't there, these days? It'll be interesting to see which direction it goes. Hopefully it'll be for in a good way.
But we like to think that.
We're optimistic cautiously. We're now in one of the other great sets, the police headquarters, Commissioner Gordon's headquarters. Do you have any recollection at all of Neil Hamilton, who played Commissioner Gordon?
Well, he was wonderful, and I liked him very much, and he was very gracious to me when I was doing the episodes. But that was the only time I ever worked with him or had any knowledge of him. And because we didn't actually have too many scenes together, but he was around, because all of us were on the set all the time, just in case, and watching and seeing what was happening. You got the opportunity to spend time with them. And both of them were wonderful. The police commissioner and the mayor were great.
Oh, good. Because Stafford Rep played Chief O'Hara, again, another wonderful actor who died sadly far too young, only 56 when he died. And again, pretty much in every episode of the show. And of course, I have got my notes, some of the gentleman who played Mayor Linseed. So you kind of were aware of them there, and you chatted, but you kind of didn't have too much to do with them. It sounds like.
No, because we pretty much were our group.
Yeah.
I don't think I even had a scene with them. I don't think.
Yeah. I think we've just gone past the episode, the scene, but I think Stafford Rep is with Commissioner Gordon in the headquarters, but again, you only have the one scene in the headquarters, so of course you probably wouldn't. Did you find that there was a bit of a sort of the guest stars would sort of hang out together, the regulars? Was there kind of a bit of sort of almost a hierarchy in terms of the actors?
Not too much. I mean, there always is, a lot of times, and especially going through the pandemic, because one of my businesses in New York is I'm in a location facility
Mhm.
for people that are shooting movies or television series and all of that stuff. And during the pandemic, the principal actors were really kept away from the other actors.
Mhm.
And because they didn't want anybody to mess with whoever the lead was.
Hmm.
And so they didn't even get to talk to the directors or the cameraman or anything. So it was very hard during the pandemic.
Yeah.
During that time period, though, people just talked about everything. I mean, you were around. There was a hierarchy, but it wasn't like it is now.
No.
Is that Vincent Price and me and whoever else would be sitting with Adam and West and the other actors. So it wasn't like you had your chair with your name on it, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
other than that, that was about it. And so there wasn't as much. Nowadays, they a lot of times keep the primary actor as far away from the rest of the cast as possible. And I don't know why. Maybe because they're trying to preserve the storyline or whatever it may be. But it is a little bit different.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was, I mean, a lot of actors say is through their careers they've noticed that kind of sort of becoming a bit less personal for various reasons. It was a gentleman called Brian Keith who played Mayor Lindsay. That was the name I was looking for
Right.
earlier. It was raccoon pelts, not beavers. That just
Was it raccoon
popped into my
pelt?
head. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm surprised because they probably should have done beavers.
I mean, again, maybe there's a slight temptation with this series to be sort of slightly not quite in the real world, so it wouldn't be so on the nose as that. It would be something not quite. It would be
Close
similar,
by.
but so they kind of had to make it a bit more sort of comic booky and perhaps one step in fantasy, I suppose, with the
Well,
series.
you know why beavers were so important is because the British and the French and all of the Europeans wore beaver skin hats. Those stovepipe hats that they were all made out of beaver skin. And they were terrified that Native Americans who never took from any culture, I mean, animal kingdom.
Yeah.
And they were afraid that the Indians would take all the beaver when they needed it for these top hats in Europe. And so that's why there was that big thing about the beaver, the pelts were so important.
Right, yeah.
And nobody had a raccoon hat.
No, that's right. There's just a couple of other actors I wanted to mention. Again, you probably don't recall, but a guy called Stephen Dunn, who played Tim Tyler, one of the millionaires, and also a guy called Albert Carter, who played Pete Savage, the other millionaire in the and again, you do have scenes with them, but I suppose they didn't really leave any impressions, I take it.
No, they were lovely. I both of the actors that played the other millionaires in the thing. Nowadays, we have to call them billionaires, and we're rapidly moving towards trillionaires.
Yeah.
But back in the day when a million was a million, I had met both of them in various locations, so we kind of knew each other.
Yeah.
And so there was a conversation and all of that stuff, but they weren't. I didn't hang out with them particularly.
Yeah.
But they were lovely guys, and I knew them, and we recognized each other, and said, "Oh, it's so nice to see you," and that kind of stuff, and that was it.
You do have a couple of scenes where you're outside the studio. I'm guessing probably very close to the 20th Century Fox lot, if not the back lot. Was it nice to do filming away from the studio lights?
Right. Oh yeah, it was wonderful. And but also 20th Century Fox, like a lot of the studios, Paramount, Columbia, all of them, had what they called there was a back lot in the city, and then you had a location, usually in the San Fernando Valley or somewhere out in the valley, where you shot all of this stuff where he's standing by the trading post, the fencing and all of that. And in this particular instance, I think they shot it on the back lot, but I know the 20th and all of them had their own locations where they would set up Western streets and all of that weren't on the physical lot. They
Yeah.
might have one or two streets, but then they would have the whole town, you
Hmm.
know, less than an hour away from Los Angeles.
Hmm.
So that they get to it, and you go over there and just grab it and come back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that when they meant Man from U.N.C.L.E., a lot of that was set in very exotic locations, and of course it was all in the back lot because they had a jungle set, they had a London, etc. So, and then of course all the lots were sold off, turned to real estate. And I think in the 70s they were thinking about bringing back the Man from U.N.C.L.E., and they just looked at the figures and said, well, we can't do this because we have to go to the actual places now because we can't fake them. So it was the money just wouldn't make sense to have shows like this at nowadays. In fact, Batman was a very, very expensive show to make, even
Right.
back in the 60s. And partly that's why it didn't last too long, because it was just so expensive compared to the ratings, and it just got kind of sort of taken off because of that, really.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Because nowadays, if you don't have the location, you just drop it in digitally.
Well, yeah, yes, so easy now, isn't it? Yeah. But
Oh, boy, it's
if you
really changed.
if you think of Batman, it's all custom made, like the Batmobiles, you know, being based upon a certain vehicle, but it's all tailor-made, tailor costumes. All the villains have different layers and things, and it was quite a sort of a, you know, expensive show to do.
Now, do you know, what did they base the car on? I think they did it on the Edsel, didn't they?
I can't remember. I know it was a gentleman called George Bowis who modified it.
Right.
But I'd have to look it up. I'll Google that in a moment. I was just wondering, I was saying about having to come back the next night to watch the part two. Oh, we've got a 1995 Lincoln Futura is the car. Thank
Ah,
you. Just got a little
oh,
comment
it's
come
a
through.
Lincoln. Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Thank you for that. So
Looks like an Edsel.
yeah, I mean, very obviously very extensively modified. And again, if you go to film conventions that I do occasionally, even in the UK, sometimes they bring the Batmobile
Do they?
over, or the cars have become almost as famous as the people involved in the shows, really.
That's amazing.
And so we were saying that with a cliffhanger, you'd have to come back the next day or the next week. Did you find that people were talking to you in between the shows and perhaps asking you what would happen, or was there a lot of excitement that you
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
noticed?
Oh, yeah. No, but it was because it was a cartoon.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't like suspense. It was sort of like, what are they going to come up to get you out of this one? You know,
Yeah,
that kind of a situation.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so there was that kind of questioning, but
Hmm.
it wasn't, oh my God, tell me, it's not a private secret. You didn't sign an NDA, you know.
No, and of course you would these days, wouldn't you? Yes, very much so. Yeah. But we haven't covered Adam West. Do you have any memories of Adam West at all?
Well, it was interesting because Adam died a while back. I'm trying to remember how, because he died younger.
Coincidentally, strangely, 6 years ago today, the
Oh,
9th of
really?
June. I just saw that on Facebook, and I thought that was a bit sort of worth mentioning. Yeah, 6 years ago, so 2017.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
to the day.
Well, he was one of the things that they say in the film business is that if you think you're the most important thing as an actor, think again, because you're only part of the thing. And Adam West thought he was the most important thing since sliced bread that had to do with the show. And he had a little bit of an ego. And Robin also did. I think they were probably devastated when the show was canceled, and for whatever reason, because they thought it was going to go on for quite a while. But but he was never my cup of tea. I liked people that were a little bit more dashing. I don't know whether you want to say it that way, but he was sort of like milk toast a little bit.
Right.
as far
Yeah.
as I was concerned.
Hmm.
But he was a nice enough guy. And the
Okay.
guy that played Robin was okay too.
Hmm.
But the crew evidently had a rough time with him, because when we did the eggshell thing,
Yes.
when we bombard each other with eggs,
Hmm.
at the end of the scene, the crew had gone out and bought eggs all over the place, and they bombarded Adam and it got Robin, I've forgotten his name.
But Ward.
Yeah, and they bombarded them with eggs. They were so excited to be able to throw eggs at them.
Hmm.
And it was so much fun because they weren't expecting it. It was a big surprise.
Yeah.
But we all knew because they had gone out to do it. So we were instructed to get out of the way and let everybody get to Adam and Robin.
Hmm.
And it was so much fun. And they were very good sports about it because it was a surprise. They weren't expecting to be bombarded with eggs.
Hmm.
But it was fun, and we all had so much fun, and I threw a couple myself.
Yeah, it does look a lot of fun, and we're about to get to that now, actually. And again, if we're talking about iconic scenes from the Batman series, this is perhaps one thing that people always seem to bring up, this egg fight. They were fresh eggs; they weren't gone off. I take it they were
Oh no, they were fresh eggs.
They were fresh, yeah.
Oh well, please God, can you imagine?
Well, yes, you would, yeah. But yeah, again, to use real eggs and stuff again is, it's something we wouldn't perhaps do these days. But it is a very fun sequence.
Yeah.
And again, you're in the middle of it, so you're very much around the action this time.
Oh yeah, no, it was fun.
It's
and knowing the surprise that was coming, because everybody had shared with us that they were going to get them.
You know the joke, yeah.
Yeah,
So how did Adam?
I knew the joke before it happened.
Yeah. So how did Adam and Bert react to it? Were they good sports about it, or
they were good sports about it? Yeah,
yeah,
because they really got creamed.
Yes, they did. Yeah. It's an actor called Bert Mustin who plays Old MacDonald, and you do have a couple of scenes where you're with him. Do you remember Bert at all?
Oh, very much so. He was again another Howard Hawks person. Hawks it very much had a group of people that played Western characters, because he did Red River, he did all kinds of Western films, and he was one of his character actors. So when we saw each other, it was fun because I remembered him from Paramount and Hawks and all of that. So he was an interesting character.
And I suppose when you're on something that's so established, with so many established cast and crew, when you meet somebody that you know that's not another new face, it kind of helps, doesn't it? I think.
Oh sure. And everybody likes to have some sort of camaraderie, you're on the set. At least somebody that knows you.
Yeah.
You should feel more secure.
And what's interesting about there's several sort of categories that the villainesses fit into, which I guess you would be one of those, that either those that sort of through the course of the episodes become remorseful and fall in love with Batman and then renounce crime, and then there are those that don't change and don't regret anything, and you would fall into that category, that she hasn't abandoned Egghead at the end. Batman says, how did you fall in with Egghead? And you say, I was just lucky, so there's no redemption for your character in that respect. Well, what do you think of Miss Bacon, perhaps how you thought of her now, perhaps compared to when you were cast? Perhaps do you look at her differently?
No, well, I would do everything differently. I mean, because as you get a little bit more experience, but she was pretty much I go where the money is type thing. And she was there to take his notes and be the ghostwriter for his book.
Yeah.
And and that hasn't changed. I mean, I think that is consistent. And I think it was actually good storyline because it shows his ego and how important that was to him.
Yeah.
And so in her case, she just went wherever the money was. That's why she would blow a kiss to Batman. and Robin, or she would be looking, if she saw it going down as Miss Bacon,
Yeah.
then she'd start canvassing the room to find out who was the next one.
Just in case. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even for a role like which is a fairly sort of comic book role, but would you kind of have in your mind a little bit of where the people you were playing had come from? Would you create like a bit of a backstory? Would you sort of approach a role like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I did with that one. I mean, she was clearly wanting to be a writer and going after what was available to her. And she was also attractive and was interested in guys, and which is where the flirting part came in. And she knew what side her bread was buttered on.
Yeah. Because we were saying earlier that when I was doing research on IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, which is always a great source of information, but it only lists 2 credits for you. These Batman episodes, and of course the Howard Hawks Red Line 7000, I think it is. But you have done more than that, haven't you?
Well, I did the Jimmy Durante show. I did Smothers Brothers. I did things when I was under contract to Columbia.
Yeah.
Once I was released from Paramount and Hawks, and I studied really hard. And that's when I discovered that I didn't have the passion that was needed to be successful. And I was looking for something that I could put my passion into. And it wasn't acting. And so that's why there's no more. I mean, I just went, okay, I'm done. Now I've been on both sides of the camera. I produce, I make things happen. In my day, when I was a young woman moving away from this, because this was given to me, as I said, on a silver platter. And when you're 19 years old, you don't say no to those kind of things. You go, oh, yes, absolutely, I'll do it. But the transition into what I did and with my life after that has been so rewarding for me. And I looked up, I remember being in the makeup room when I was doing Red Line, and I had already started to get gray hair, at my temples, and I was 19. And one of the girls in the makeup room went, oh my God, you're getting gray. Oh, this is horrible. Oh, God. What are you going to do about this? And start pulling him out. And I went, wait a minute. I don't want to be doing something that I have to worry about how I look for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And whether I've got gray hair or purple hair. I mean, it's just, and that's why a lot of these things were part of the reason why I stopped acting. Is that I just didn't have that kind of sensibility. But the time I had doing it while I did it was fabulous. And the fact that I got to work with Vincent Price and all of the people, Adam West, all of those guys, and with Jimmy Kahn. I mean, Jimmy was a wonderful friend. And Howard Hawks taught me so much. But I realized that you've got to have that passion. It has to be there, and no matter what you do. And that was a big life lesson for me. And it formed the rest of my life, because I don't do anything anymore with my life unless I am absolutely enmeshed in it. And I want to make a difference, or it changes my life, or it can change other people's lives. And for me, my father used to say to me, you can be and do anything you want in the whole world, as long as you give it 150%. Not 100%, but 150, and you will be successful at it. And then if you find you don't like it, quit immediately and go on to the next thing. So at 80 years old, I can say I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And because I'm constantly changing and evolving, because my interests change and evolve. And so I encourage people to follow their heart, because so many times we do what our parents think we should do. We become doctors because my grandfather was a doctor, or whatever the reason. And it's so important, if you embrace life with both hands, and just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to live. Just follow what you want to do, and if you don't quite know what it is,
Give
try
it
different things. And
150%.
yeah. So your parents sound like they were always supportive of whatever you did. So they didn't mind you going into to the film and TV business, and they were always kind
Oh
of
my
sort of
God, they were
happy.
mortified.
Oh, well,
I mean,
oh, well.
my parents were very conservative. And
Ah,
as far as acting and modeling and all the stuff that I did at that point, because I did it for the first 4 or 5 years of my life, right? I mean, my adult life.
yeah.
And that was just one step away from prostitution as far as a nice Catholic family is concerned, back in the 50s and 60s. So I was my mother was very proud of me,
Yeah.
but she was also slightly embarrassed that I wasn't, studying to be a teacher or something that was expected of women in those days. Because God forbid you couldn't dream of thinking of being in science or running a business. I mean, women didn't do that. And the ones that did, and I was lucky enough to model for Coco Chanel when I first started out in the business. And to find people like that, I was so blessed that I got to spend time with Katharine Hepburn when I was under contract at Paramount. I mean, these were the people that made a difference in my life because they showed me that you can be a woman and you can still make a difference. You don't have to go, because the 50s and 60s were male dominated. I mean, women weren't in science, they weren't in medicine, they weren't in any of that kind of stuff. And it wasn't accepted, and you had to be a real groundbreaker. And a lot of people went into film because that it could be, because it's hard to have a guy. Shakespeare did it, but not many people since, where they had been playing female roles. But
yes, yeah.
So it's a very interesting time that I was blessed to be born into.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, was going into the modeling a bit of was there a bit of a rebellious instinct going on in terms of we were having conservative parents, or was it just something that just happened to come your way?
It just came my way. I mean, my mom was into charities and did all kinds of things, and I was asked to model in a charity show that she was doing. And I did it, and I won a scholarship to go to this modeling school. And so I went, and all of a sudden, within less than 3 months, I was practically teaching the class. And that's what started me modeling. And I never thought about doing it. I was tall. I've always been like 5'9", 5'10". And back in my day, that was tall. And nowadays, 6 foot is the number. But 5'10" was very tall in those days, in the 50s and 60s.
Do you have any highlights from your modeling career that you haven't already mentioned, that you particular shoots or other people that you might have met?
Oh God, well, I got to work for Irving Penn, who was one of the top photographers, and Diana Vreeland, who was the head of Vogue magazine. So I got to do Coco Chanel's. I only did runway a couple of times, because back in those days, if you did runway, you didn't do photography. I mean, but nowadays all the models do both. I mean, there's no definition between it.
Right.
And back in those days also, if you shot for Vogue magazine, you couldn't work for Harper's Bazaar. So all of that has kind of changed now. But I was very lucky, because Diana Vreeland liked me, and she thought I was like Audrey Hepburn, and that was her favorite person. So she pushed me a lot. And so I got to work with Irving Penn and a whole bunch of really wonderful photographers. And then you outgrow it, I mean, I had more interest in things other than just my hair and my makeup and what I was putting on my body. And so my attention went to other things, and I just let it fall apart.
Do you ever find it a bit sorry, Gail, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say that I realized that I started to say I let it fall apart. I didn't let it fall apart. I just stopped doing it. That's all.
have you, so it was kind of because if you look at your role in Batman, it's the secretary role. When things get ugly, you excuse yourself, you don't want to see the blood, and so there is a certain way that women are portrayed on
In
screen.
those days.
Yeah. Did you find that also as a woman in the 60s, and that again to be taken seriously? Did you find that was sometimes a bit of an uphill struggle?
Well, I think that if I had gone on with my career, I would have definitely.
Yeah.
Even with that one, when they said you got to leave the room, I went, why? And they said, well, because you're supposed to be a frail, and not be, you don't want to see the violence. And I went, I know a lot. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde, come on, guys. I mean, she created the violence.
Yeah.
So that kind of bothered me a little bit, but I just did what I was told, and that was the end of it.
I mean, of course, Batman does have a strong female character with Catwoman, but unless you were either playing that kind of a lead female role, a lot of the others unfortunately seem to be, a bit like we were saying, it's how people perceive the world at the time, the stereotypes that we've already kind of discussed. I haven't mentioned the director, George Wagner. Do you remember George at all?
I do. And the funny thing is, I loved when I saw the way he put his name up with the 2 big G's.
Yes, yes.
And that made me laugh because that was very much him. But I only knew him during that time period, but he was a very good director. And he did quite a few of these, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, he did 10 Batmans.
Yeah.
This was actually his first directing, and certainly in terms of broadcast order anyway. So he was new to the show at this point. So with the big G's, you're sort of saying he was quite flamboyant and a big character sort of thing.
Yeah. He had personality.
And so it's an actor's director as well, sort of quite good with actors.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, one of the things about actors, directors, I had a very dear friend, Bob Altman, who was considered one of the top actor directors. And I don't know if you know his career, but
Robert Altman.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why that all the actors wanted to work with him was because he would allow them to experiment. Where a lot of people, directors in those days, would say, no, this is the way you look to the right, you look to the left, you scowl, you do whatever you're going to do. And he would say, how do you think the role should be played? And actors love that. And I got the feeling, I don't know what happened to the director as he went forward with his career, but there was that, because he asked me about the blowing of the kiss and that kind of thing. What would you do? And so there was definitely, he was interested in what the actors had to say.
I just sort of look and see if I had any questions, because some people have emailed questions ahead of tonight. So question from a gentleman called Ian. How long were you on the episodes total? So how long kind of did it take to shoot?
Oh, I with breaking and all of that stuff, I'd say it wasn't very more than a month or so, tops.
Because of course you would shoot it, although it was a split into 2 episodes, it was effectively a 50-minute story, wasn't it? That was sort of shot kind of as one piece. An interesting bit of trivia for those watching might be interested in. During the reprise of the cliffhanger, there is a bit of dialogue. You can't hear it, but there's Egghead sort of waves goodbye and says goodbye, Bruce Wayne, and we can just hear William Dozier's narration over that. The actual scene doesn't actually appear in either parts of the episode, so that's something I just noticed recently. Another question I've had from Lee. Did you find that you could ad lib with the script, or was it kind of a pretty much sort of set in what in terms you could do?
Oh no, it was set. I mean, you had your dialogue, but they would allow you to put an emphasis on it. So it wasn't, you weren't locked down, but you had to hit your marks and you had to say your lines properly.
Yeah.
And there's always a script girl there making sure you say it.
Yeah.
And, so, but it wasn't like, I didn't have anything. I was a secondary role. I mean, a third role actually. And so it wasn't like I was trying to get a subtext across or anything like that, where you would have that opportunity. It was pretty much a two-surface character.
Yeah.
At that point. I
I
tried to give her a little bit more depth, but not much.
Well, you can only also, of course, do what's on the page. There was another little information about the car. So we said it was 1955 Lincoln. It was a concept car prototype that didn't go into production, so it was available for the production company to buy and then modified it as they wanted to. So I just having seen the episodes again, do you have any particular favorite scenes or moments? Doesn't necessarily have to be with you, but just things that you thought worked really well.
Well, I liked when all of the millionaires were having to deal with the fact that they were going to lose Gotham.
Yeah.
And I was surprised that there wasn't more reaction from it. I mean, because but again, it was a camp situation. And but and at the time I was surprised because I thought, oh, they got to be more upset, I mean,
Yeah,
they're losing all of Gotham City and because they can't get there in time. But that was it. I mean, for the most part.
Yeah, sort of maybe they're more sort of quiet shock, aren't they? But I think for me, any scene with Chief Screaming Chicken, I think that is a wonderful. Edward Everett Horton, fantastic actor. He played a similar character in a series called F Troop, which starred Larry Storch, and he was his character was Warring Chicken, so it was kind of a slight send up of a character he plays. That's
now that you're saying that, I remember that now. That's amazing.
And I think it's a really good script as well. I should mention Stanley Welf Ross, who wrote 27 episodes of Batman. So it had a really good script, a very good director. I think, so you would say it holds up very, obviously, perhaps despite certain political correctness, and overall, you would say it still holds up and it's still good after all these years?
I think so. I think for what it is, even though the political correctness, I was mortified. I had forgotten how much, how incorrect it was. But the points and the saving graces were the things you pointed out. Where they tried to recognize that he had been misaligned and badly treated as a native people. And the fact that they could, and the jokes they made about only selling Manhattan for $24 or whatever it was.
It could have got 35, yes. That was great.
Exactly.
Just really summed it up, didn't it? What actually, how they were taken for. And there was also another bit when Bruce and Dick are talking about the fact that the Chief Screaming Chicken has turned, and Batman says, or Bruce Wayne says, he would, in his early career, he worked for somebody who had an argument, and he was told to go back to his own country, and he was in his own country. So I thought that was
I love that
was a very good, and he said, no wonder he's dissatisfied, and I thought that was, very much sort of on, a good message.
Now that you bring it up, I particularly like that, because when I was first working with the American Indian College Fund and doing all this stuff, we would talk about Indian country. We went into foundations and boards and all of that to raise money. And they'd say, where is Indian country? And I'd say, you're standing on it. All of America is Indian country. And people just didn't get it. They literally do not understand. And it's not in our history books at all. As I pointed out, my husband pointed out very clearly, it's the conquerors that write the books, not the losers. And we don't have our history down accurately, about our early history. I mean, people really think that America started with the Pilgrims landing, and they forget that we have a culture here that rivals the Egyptians and is equally as rich and deep and incredibly artistic
Yeah.
as the Egyptians were. And it was the same time period too.
Mm.
And it goes back even further than the Egyptians. But and most people have no idea that it even exists. So even with, I think it was very brave of them to do an Indian thing, actually, at that time period.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and even though I was appalled when I realized how politically incorrect it was, but I also thought it was very daring, because people didn't do that. But Native people were the bad guys, and that's all they ever were. And it's appalling that we cast them in that kind of a light. Where this one is not quite as bad about that.
No.
Because at least he's got them by the short and curly, so to speak, a little bit.
Yeah. And it starts a conversation like we're having now. You know, it opens up the possibilities. And I was in Australia a few years ago, and it was Australia Day, and they were on the radio, on the news, they were talking about the natives, and they were saying they were giving thanks for the land that, you know, so they were being grateful for, kind of almost apologizing for taking the land, not to the point where they were going to give it back. They just seemed to be a little hypocritical, almost a little bit, sort of recognizing that we didn't do things correctly, but not going to do anything about it, sort of thing. So
absolutely.
I think that still exists quite a lot. The other thing I would just want to briefly touch on before we go is that the idea of sort of censorship in terms of older content, because Disney have recently brought out the French Connection films, the Gene Hackman films, on their channel, and they have edited some of the racist language and some of the things that aren't considered to be PC. Certain books are being rewritten, the Bond novels, certain things are being taken out. If you could get a situation where half these episodes might, you know, from going 15 minutes to 25, taking. Well, what do you think of that kind of revisionism that's happening? What do you think about it?
Well, I think in this particular instance, I think it needs to be there.
Yeah.
Because it times it. It puts it into the proper framework. I know a dear friend of mine was very involved when 20th Century Fox sold their portfolio of films, and they colorized them. And my husband was mortified as a director. They were meant to be black and white. You do not want to colorize them and all that stuff. And that's kind of upgrading and bringing it up to the new time period. And now when you see them, you forget that they were in black and white. And black and white was an incredible statement, but life is in color. And so all of those things, if maybe, and something that was totally PC, that was not, I mean, totally on PC, it would be nice to have a disclaimer at the end saying this was shot in the 50s and times have changed, but we're not changing the content because this is the way it was at the time. And so I think that kind of thing might be good, but at least to recognize that we've stepped away from that kind of behavior.
Yeah. I think it's an acknowledgement, but I think if you're going to start introducing censorship, if you look at history, nothing ever goes well when you introduce, even if it's good intentions, because people may not be aware of issues because they're not seeing something and they're not going to a teacher and saying, I heard this word on the film last night, what does it mean? And then you work out what it is, and then you have a look and you see how people were treated in a certain period. If you've taken that out, people will not realize the history and the bad stuff. And of course, if you don't know your history, you repeat history anyway, no matter what, but you will nevertheless, it makes it easier to make the same mistakes, doesn't it, if there's no awareness of it? So
that's so true. It's so true. One of my favorite lines is that you just touched on without saying it, is that how long are you going to bang on that door before you realize, I mean, that wall, before you realize you can't make it a door?
Yeah.
And it's very true. I mean, it is very much like that.
Yeah.
And so it's part of our evolution as a species.
Hmm.
And so I don't believe, I mean, if you're remaking the film completely and doing another version of it that's contemporary, then yeah, go for it. But don't just, because you're editing it to make it PC so you can re-put it up.
Yeah.
And you're using the same characters and everything is the same. I
Mm.
think it's almost a sin to change the content because it is of the time period. And I think, but I think a disclaimer saying we've grown and we've advanced, and please excuse our faux pas, you know.
Yeah, I quite agree. I did want to, do you have any other memories of Red Line 7000 that you wanted to perhaps mention at all?
Red Line was a wonderful film at that point, and I started driving cars. I mean, I had been very much involved with cars, but I realized that during that time period, the two things that were totally verboten on racetracks was the color British racing green, because they were in such competition with the British that you could not have green anywhere near the pits. And women were considered bad luck,
Right.
because they would distract the guys, evidently, they were thought, the drivers. So women were not allowed on the pits or on racetracks, other than in the stands to watch a race. Yeah. And that has changed a lot. And when I started driving, I did tire testing and for Pontiac and Goodyear, and did them on the tracks, but I wasn't allowed to race on a track if there was anybody of any kind of merit on the tracks. I had to do it pretty much by myself alone with whoever the crew was, and we were testing the tires and doing all this stuff. But I was not allowed to be anywhere near the tracks because women were bad luck, you know.
Well, there is that, the theme is in the film, isn't there? Sort of your initial feelings of guilt that you are a bad luck charm, and so that feeds into it, doesn't it? Yeah. So Howard Hawks seems to be a bit of a sort of a bit of a prickly character from some of what you've already told me. Would you? Yeah. I mean, do you see him as a good director, albeit?
Oh, he was a wonderful director, absolutely wonderful, and he cared about things. He cared about. He always wanted the words to be clear, and he wanted the definition to be clear. And some of his films are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I don't know how many of them you know, but Hatari was a brilliant film. Red River with John Wayne was a brilliant film. El Dorado was a wonderful film. I'm sorry I didn't get to do it because my rebellion and taking acting lessons from Jimmy.
Yeah.
But if I was going to do it, I wanted to at least be plausible, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but he was a brilliant director, a really good director, and there's hardly a bad Hawks film out there.
Yeah, I mean, they're all very good, but a lot of westerns. Rio Bravo, another one of his. So Red Line was very much sort of a different thing for him, wasn't it? Sort of with the racing.
Well, he loved racing. He loved race cars.
You mentioned Katharine Hepburn earlier. Is there any memories of Katharine Hepburn you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, she was the very first woman that wore trousers. She and Coco Chanel both. And what grabbed me on her, first of all, was she was so gracious and so kind. And she would come into our acting classes where we were, and she'd read lines with us and all of that stuff. And she was so stylish and so elegant. And I love the fact that, I mean, I was tall, and I had a hard time buying trousers because even though when you went to a halfway decent restaurant, if you had a pair of pants on, they gave you a skirt to wrap around you because women weren't allowed to wear pants, right? Yeah. And so she's the one that turned me on to buying pants from men's stores because I could get the length I wanted. And because I have a short rise, I wanted a short rise with long legs, and you couldn't get them in women's clothes. It was just impossible. If you got them, the rise short enough, the pants came up to your mid calf, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And so and if she hadn't told me to go to the men's department, I would never work that out. And the minute I did, I went, oh, I was so grateful for her. I couldn't believe it. I rushed in and showed her my trousers the minute I got them. And I said, thank you, thank you. I mean, she was that kind of person. I mean, she was a gracious, wonderful, generous human being who I was very lucky to spend a little bit of time with.
Yeah, it's a wonderful person to have known. We have one question that fits nicely into costumes. It was a lady called Jan Kemp who was on Batman, who did the costume designs. And I think we've already alluded that you kind of worked with her a little bit and sort of developed your outfits. Do you remember her specifically?
Not I remember working with her and coming up with the yellow hat and all of that stuff. No, she did a good job. I mean, she did wonderful. The one that the designer that I was very taken with though was Edith Head, who did my costumes for Redline. And she was an amazing character and won all kinds of Academy Awards and was unbelievable. And what she did, the outfit that she did on Redline for me to sing in was absolutely fabulous, and is still today would be a jaw dropper if somebody walked into a restaurant with something on like that. So I mean, she was very advanced. But the lady that did Batman was lovely. I mean, but she wasn't. Edith really was like a high-end designer. I mean, she was up there with Courage and all of those kind of people, and was coming up with things that were quite unique. And she was quite an experience.
Just going back to Batman briefly, was it quite a fun set? Was there lots of giggles? Was it because of some of the absurdities and the dialogue? Was it?
We would make jokes about pow, slam, bang, right? I mean, all that kind of stuff, because you didn't get to see the visuals. You knew they were going to happen. So there was always that kind of funny sound that you make, go, wow, boom, you know, whatever it was, because that was fun and that we loved that.
So a few takes needed to get certain things done sometimes. It's not stuff. But do you find that Vincent Price would giggle a lot, or was he quite a serious actor?
Oh, he was a very serious actor, but he was also one of the nicest, kindest, had the best sense of humor, very knowledgeable about art and all of that stuff. I mean, I enjoyed every minute I got to spend with him. And because he resonated with me, I got to visit his home and see his art collection and a whole bunch of stuff that I was very thrilled that I got to spend that time with him.
Sounds lovely. And of course, art has been very important to you. You've done lots of artwork for your life. Is that something you've always had a natural ability for, or is something that you taught yourself, or?
I study at the New School, I mean, and the Art Students League in New York, but for the most part, I was self-taught. And the kind of work I do is very simplistic. In fact, when I was painting and selling my work, now I'm having a resurgence. I mean, people have found me on Shopify, and I have young people that are buying my work, and I'm surprised because when I was actually out in the marketplace, people didn't buy it as much as they're doing now, mainly because I was more, I don't know if you know Native American, I mean, American artists, but Will Barnett and a bunch of, there were 2 or 3 artists that had a similar style to mine. And because I put my paintbrushes down to start the college fund and do the work I've done in education, I've now watched them and their careers. But in my day, when I was showing my work, people were inclined towards abstracts. They were like, well, abstract had really come in, and landscapes. And I didn't do either one. And but now people are minimalist. And people are very into modern houses, and they may have everything modern and then one antique piece. And my work lends itself to that. So I've had this sort of this little upsurge that I cannot believe is happening.
Mm.
That people are of a younger age are kind of finding my work.
Mm.
So I'm thrilled and delighted, but a little surprised, you know.
I suppose art, is it like any other thing where it's fashion, it comes full circle, doesn't it? So some things come in and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, flavors of the month, you know, that kind of
Mm.
thing.
And just sort of thinking about what final thought on Batman, you said that it's kind of been a forgotten part of your life until I sort of came knocking. But over the years, has it occasionally popped in, or people recognized you, or maybe when there's been a film coming out, or?
Well, oddly enough, the Japanese, well, when I was younger, now because I'm so much older, but a lot of time I would have Japanese people stop me in the street because they loved Howard Hawks and they also loved Batman.
Yeah.
And so they would recognize me from that and say, were you in that movie or whatever it was? And so it was more Europeans that responded to it than Americans for the most part, that I found. Yeah.
And you did remind me of I want to mention George Takei. Did you have much to do with George Takei on Redline?
Oh, he was wonderful. I loved him. And he was such an interesting, wonderful character. He was an amazing guy, very knowledgeable. And the fact that he played the head of the team or whatever it was that it was in the film. Norman Alden, who was in Redline, was a comedian, oddly enough, and he played one of the pit bosses or whatever it was. And he's the one that introduced me to George originally before we even did the film. And I really liked him. I thought he was terrific. He was a very interesting character. Yeah.
I saw him on stage a few months ago in the West End. He was doing Allegiance, about which of course the Japanese concentration camps in America, and he was playing, it wasn't a direct thing about his family, but it was based upon his family's experiences and of those that his family knew, and it was a superb performance. And one of those things that people don't necessarily know too much about in terms of that period of history. So I think if people are interested, Google Allegiance, George Takei, and it comes up, and I think there may even be a digital version that people can watch of the Broadway show. It's really
in that movie, the book Snow Falling on Cedar came out. I don't know if you ever read it.
I've seen the film a while ago.
Well, it was an amazing book. But because of the time I grew up in, because I was born in 41, in California, we had Japanese holding camps. And they were very much like concentration camps for the most part, as nobody was allowed to leave the premises. I mean, it wasn't like you could come and go. And I had friends who were in those camps when the war was over and came into the regular school system. And it was pretty devastating. I mean, to be isolated like that. And I know he was influenced by that a lot as a young man.
Yeah, and of course, when they were released, they were just pretty much abandoned for many years until property taken away from them, and had no money or anything. Did you have any?
Go ahead, Philip. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
Oh yes, I was just going to, a bit parallel to the Native American story, the injustice and the period of time it took for that to be kind of even just recognized and never really solved in a satisfactory way, unfortunately.
No, we've been pretty bad as a nation of people in how we've dealt with our immigrants and all of that stuff. And before, because almost one of the things that people forget is that in America, everybody's an immigrant. And they forget that unless you're native, you did not come from America. Your family came from somewhere else. And they were in England or Scotland or France or anything. It goes back centuries and centuries. Where
Mm.
here, it only goes to 1776, you know,
Oh.
and that's when America became the America.
Mm.
And a lot of people, and I don't want to go into a history lesson here. I've already given you way too much that you probably didn't even need. But is that people, a lot of the tribes that are trying to get back together again. I've worked with some of the East Coast tribes, and they wanted to be able to become sovereign nation status. And they don't understand that what makes a sovereign nation is you had to have been at war with America after 1776, because at that point, America became America, right?
Mm.
And a lot of the East Coast tribes were dissimulated and moved off their property and their land and pushed west because of the colonialists coming in. And so they never even had a battle with the Europeans, because it had to have been after 1776. And they can't understand why the Lakota and the Crow and the Northern Cheyenne and all these people have sovereign nation status, and they can't, is because they didn't have a battle with America, where the Lakota and the Crow and all those guys did, because they were fighting for their land and they were trying to keep America Indian, you know. And that's one of my favorite lines, is that when I'm sure you've probably seen the T-shirt of Sitting Bull, and it says, or no, it's Geronimo, excuse me, Geronimo, and it has he and his warriors with their guns and their bayonets and all that stuff up. And he said, protecting Homeland Security since 1492.
That's very good. Yeah.
So true.
Just my penultimate question, was there anything more about James Caan that you'd like to share?
Well, he was one of the most generous, kind, wonderful people in the whole world. I mean, I would never have gotten through that film without him. And he was cocky and all of that stuff, but he was so generous of spirit, and he was wonderful. Absolutely. He was a brilliant actor. And he played within the framework of who his character was. I mean, who his personality was, not character, because he brought his own character to all of his people, all the characters he played. And he was very talented. I mean, The Gambler, have you ever seen The Gambler?
A long time ago, yeah.
Oh, it was one of the most torturous films ever, because he really caught what it was like to be an addicted gambler. And what he went through, because I was around a little bit when he was doing that one. And I was blown away by the quality that he could bring into something that was amazing to me, absolutely amazing. I think he was one of our foremost actors.
Oh yeah.
And he was in quite a few hits. I mean, like The Godfather and a whole bunch of ones where he's well known for. But he also did a lot of films that people don't know, because they weren't big, you know, they were independents and things like that. And they didn't have a studio behind them pushing them, that are very in depth. And the depth of characters that he did was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah, wonderful actor. One of those, as you say, is sort of such a big personality, and it sort of brings so much of him into a role. I mean, if you, what must be quite nice, just finishing off with Batman, is that it's sort of because it is a comic book, you can sort of be a bit more broad, a bit more loose, a bit sort of ham it up almost a little bit. So is it quite nice to compared to a more dramatic role such as in Redline, to sort of have a bit more sort of fun sort of palette to work with?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you make a mistake, you can incorporate it.
Yes. You can, yeah. Well, I've enjoyed every second of our chat, Gail. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I've enjoyed all our little, you know, I've learned a lot talking to you, which is wonderful. Is there any final comments you'd like? Any final thoughts before we go?
No, it's been a delight, Philip. I had no idea what I was getting into. And it was a treat getting the films because as I say, I haven't seen them I shudder to say how many years. And it was fun. I really enjoyed it. And I thank you for that.
Oh, good. It's been my pleasure. Because it's so long ago, is it almost like looking at somebody else? Can you divorce yourself a bit from that person on the screen, or do you think, yes, that's me?
Oh no, it was me then.
You then, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I think,
thank you.
yeah. Well, I think it's a great performance, a classic pair of episodes, and thank you very much for joining me to talk about them.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a splendid way to spend the afternoon. Thank you, my darling.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Okay, take good care of yourself, and thank you.
And you. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, love. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.